What's happening, everybody? Welcome back to the Fearless Chaplaincy on the Go podcast. I'm Josh Zorhoff. I'm a licensed therapist and a teaching pastor with the Fearless family of churches. I am also a corporate chaplain, and I head up our chaplaincy program here at the churches. And I am excited to continue our conversation on stress with you right now. In our first episode, we talked about the different types of stress. We talked about good stress, bad stress, and toxic stress. We spent most of our time unpacking the reality of good stress in our lives and our need for it. On this episode, we're going to focus in on bad stress. So if you didn't have a chance to learn a little bit about good stress, go ahead and push pause, go back to our first episode, give that a listen, and then follow up into our now conversation of bad stress. I want to remind us of a survey and a study that was done at UC Berkeley and the results of that study. Stress can be something that makes you better, but it is a question of how much, how long, and how you interpret or perceive it. Again, stress can be something that makes us better, but if there's too much or it goes on for too long, it can become a problem. And that is when good turns to bad. Now, I want to make a clarifying statement here. Some stress is good for us, but too much of a good thing can also be bad. And when we talk about bad stress, we talk about something that counselors call tolerable stress. There's a threshold for how much we can tolerate when it comes to stress. I like to call bad stress something that occurs with the terrible twos. For those of you who have children, we're not talking about the 2-year-olds. In fact, for my wife and I, it was actually the terrible 3s when things got really bad. It was the terrific 2s for us. This is a different kind of 2. Too much, too great, too intense, too long. Any stress from positive or negative circumstances can become bad or intolerable to us. If the stress is persistent or it's overwhelming or it becomes unmanageable or suddenly becomes serious, something that we have to deal with in an emergency or maybe even a crisis, that can turn into what is called bad stress. Stress is a cumulative and compound reality, and stress, even when it's manageable, if it goes on for a long period of time, can become bad. And here's how it works. Stress builds. Our bodies physically hold on to stress during the day. Our bodies hold on to the stresses of life, and we can carry stress after stress after stress into the next day. It's called a somatic response to stress. Our bodies will physically hold on to it. And so if you go to bed stressed out and you don't do anything to relieve that stress, guess what? You're going to wake up stressed out. And in fact, you may even wake up more stressed out than when you went to bed. And that carries on day after day after day. And so if you have something that's going on in your life that's causing stress and there's no relief, and you take that stress into the next day and something else happened, it's going to build on that. And all of a sudden we find ourselves in a place where we are more stressed out and we don't know what to do with it. Stress builds over time. Stress compounds over time. If you are familiar with financial terms, compound interest when it comes to our money is really, really good because our money doubles effectively every 7 years when we invest it well. But when it comes to stress, that is not a good thing. Our stress builds. And in fact, as we get older, if we do not vent that stress in a healthy way, it's going to build, it's going to double, it's going to increase. And this is why a lot of people, when they move from their 20s to their 30s, start to experience things like stress headaches, panic attacks, trouble breathing, all of a sudden, the stress that used to be manageable for them becomes unmanageable. For years, I worked with a lot of men who in their 30s started getting migraines, started having panic attacks, and all of this they thought was happening overnight. But really what was happening is the stress that they had been in for most of their life had all of a sudden compounded and became unmanageable. In fact, I like to put it in terms of going to a chiropractor. When my wife had some problems with her hip a number of years ago, we decided to take her in to see a chiropractor. And the chiropractor told us something really interesting. He said that most people walk around maladjusted to a certain degree, and they just cope with it by adjusting their bodies, by changing the way they walk. And all of a sudden, as they make these subtle changes to their body, their body gets used to it. But after a while, you can only adjust so much before the pain sets in and you can't deal with it any longer. And that's when you need to go and see a chiropractor, go see a doctor, get some medicine, because you can no longer manage that maladjustment on your own. Stress works the same way. And here's one element that we have to consider. Our brains and our bodies will adjust to the stress that we're in, and we'll get used to it until it becomes so bad that we can't do anything about it anymore. And I want to talk about really important chemicals that are released during stressful experiences. The first chemical is adrenaline, and the second is cortisol. Adrenaline, most of us know about. Adrenaline, most of us have heard about. Adrenaline is a chemical that is released into our bodies that makes us feel strong and powerful. But here's the really interesting thing about adrenaline. It doesn't give you energy. It borrows energy from later on in the day. For those of you who drink coffee, and I drink coffee, I have half a cup to a cup every morning, and that's about all I can take. And here's why. Caffeine does not give you energy. It triggers adrenaline production, and it tells your body, hey, that energy that you have later on in the day for me, I need it right now to wake up and function and do my job and do the things that I need to do. And what you're effectively doing is you are stealing energy from later on in the day. If you've ever had too much coffee and you get the shakes, and then later on in the afternoon, you start to crash and you need to get another cup of coffee, you have a Mountain Dew or you have a Monster, and you get that jolt of sugar and that jolt of adrenaline, that's good for the moment, but there reaches a point where you cannot borrow any more adrenaline, you cannot borrow any more energy or strength from later on in the day, and you crash. That's what adrenaline does. And stress triggers adrenaline production. It pushes us into what is known as the stress response: fight, flight, freeze, fawn, different types of responses. Most of us know fight or flight, but stress actually puts us into that space. The other chemical that's really important to know about is cortisol. Cortisol is responsible for telling the body, we are in an emergency and you need to take this seriously. It gives us focus. It gives us clarity. It helps us power through tough situations. It tells the body it's time to get serious. It also tells the body the threat is gone and it's time to relax. In low amounts, cortisol is very important to us and our functioning. But in high amounts, it is toxic to the brain. Studies have shown that high levels of cortisol that do not dissipate can actually shrink the prefrontal lobes or the prefrontal cortex, the part of our brain that is responsible for rational thought, critical thinking. It can actually shrink that part of the brain by anywhere from 20 to 25%, and that is neurological damage that is permanent. If you have high levels of cortisol, you are more likely to get sick. You retain weight. It's harder for you to fall asleep. The more exposed you are to cortisol, the more cortisol it takes to help you either ramp up or calm down. And so if you are under a bad stress scenario and your body is pumping out adrenaline and cortisol, that's helping you in the immediate to get through that situation. But if you don't know how to calm yourself back down, or you stay in that high intensity moment, those chemicals are staying in your body and they are wreaking havoc on later on in the day, whether it is your ability to calm down or your ability to rest and have a time of peace and clarity. If you are amped up too much with cortisol, it's going to take you a lot longer to calm down. And here's the big deal with this. We want to be mindful of our stress levels, because if we are in bad stress for too long, for extensive periods of time, we'll get used to it. Our brains and our bodies will adjust, and we will start to operate in and even create highly stressful environments to feel normal, all the while doing damage to our mind and our body and our soul. I know a lot of people who have been through really stressful situations in life, and after they come out of it, because their bodies and brains have conditioned to it, they don't know how to calm down the same way. And they actually create chaos in order to thrive and function. We don't want to get to that place. We don't want to get used to thinking, boy, bad stress is just how I operate. And we don't want our brains and our bodies to relate that way. So here's a couple of things to consider when we talk about bad stress. The first is to get a handle on how much stress that we're under and how much of it is not necessarily helpful to us in our lives. First, I break things into categories: work stress, home stress, family stress, life stress, and other. If you're following along, we've got a worksheet here in our notes section. We've got in the podcast notes something for you to work through, but break these into categories and think through. So let me describe them for you. Work stress, that's usually a given. If you work in the home or out of the home, we all have items in our day that cause us stress. Sometimes it's agenda pieces. Sometimes it's tasks. Sometimes it's people. Interpersonal stress at work is still a stress. So if there's a person who just aggravates you by the sheer reality of their existing and being in the same space at work, go ahead and consider that person a work stress. That's okay. At home, maybe you've got some to-dos at home that you need to take care of. I have a piece of molding that I purchased years ago that needs to go over the stairway as you go down into our basement. And I have not put that piece of molding on. There's a temporary piece on there that my wife and my son constantly kick. Sometimes I kick it and it falls off and we have to put it back on. And it's a real pain. And I have not taken care of that in the last, 7 years probably. And every time I look at it, I'm like, yep, I got to take care of that. Sometimes it's laundry. In October or November, I know that I need to take the grill gazebo down and I need to take my grill stuff and put it under and get everything wrapped up and winterized because I don't want to have to deal with that when the snow falls. So that becomes a stressor for me. If the garage isn't clean and I need to get the cars in when a storm is coming, I'm constantly thinking about how am I going to do that? Anything that you have to do at home that causes you stress or you think about during the day, you should probably write that down. Put that in that category. Family. I like to separate family from home because not all of our family lives in the home. Do you have a parent who's aging? Do you have a parent who's sick or in the hospital? Do you have a loved one that's going through something really hard right now? That's a stressor. Do you have kids? And your kids are starting school or going to college or entering into the workforce. and they've got new challenges to face, and you're concerned about them. You worry about them. That is going to be a stressor for you. My dad has Parkinson's in its final stage. He's struggling. He was in the hospital for a month and a half. That's a long time. It caused a lot of chaos in my mind and in my heart, and for my mom and for my sisters and my brother. That's stressful. And if I have a lot of work stress and I have a lot of home stress already, and then I got family stress on top of it, that might throw me into a place where I'm feeling the effects of bad stress. Well, how about life? How about when the check engine light goes on, or the car won't start, or the person in front of you in the grocery line forgets their credit card and takes way more time in the line than you needed them to, or you thought they would take? Or maybe you are driving down the road and somebody with an Ohio State sticker on their bumper gets in front of you and goes slower than you want them to, and that just ticks you off. That falls in the category of other. When we have work stress, home stress, family stress, life stress, or other stress that comes our way, we need to pay attention to it. A lot of times what I do with clients is I take these categories and I put them down on a whiteboard, and we sit and we stare at the whiteboard while they fill it out. And I ask them to write everything down. In fact, maybe that's a good practice for you. Write down all of the stresses that you have, all of the stressors that are causing you frustration, and don't stop writing until you're pretty sure you got them all written down. And then just take a look at it and acknowledge, do I have a lot of stress? Some of the things you write down might be a major life stress. Getting married, moving, buying a house, starting a new job, having a child, that is all major life stress. And if you're feeling the effects of that stress, probably for a good reason, because you've got a lot going on. When you look at a list like that, if you write them down, just ask the question, are there any stressors that I can remove from my life without creating more stress? Most of the time, we can't remove them. If they're things at home or things at work, they need to get done. And so we can't remove them. We can't get rid of them. So you may want to just realize a lot of the stress that you're under can't do anything to make it go away, or the stressors at least to go away. You can't remove them. So then you have to ask the question, what am I doing to help relieve some of the stress that I feel from those work, life, home, family, other stressors that I feel? These are called coping skills, or coping mechanisms, or coping tools. Things that you can do every single day to help vent some of that pressure that you feel from the stress that you're under. Maybe you talk with a friend, someone you trust. Maybe you enjoy a glass of wine or beer or tea at the end of the night. Maybe you go for a walk. Maybe you spend time with family. Maybe you spend time alone. Maybe you read. Maybe you meditate. Maybe you exercise. Maybe you pray. There's lots of different coping skills that we utilize. And so I just want to ask you, what are some of the things that you do to relieve stress? Are they healthy for you? Are they helpful? If you've got a few of those, I encourage you to write them down and just ask the question, are my skills sufficient for the level of stress that I'm under? And if they are you utilizing them regularly? And if they're not, if you are not using them regularly, what do you need to do to make sure you do that? What's your plan? If you don't have skills, maybe it's time to add some. Maybe it's time to create some. And I just want to pause on that for a moment, because I had a question from our very first episode. And the question was this: how do I know whether I'm practicing self-care or I'm being selfish? And though that is a very challenging distinction, let me just say one thing about that. Self-care is not selfish. It's not. In fact, if you are prioritizing your own personal health for the sake of making sure that you are caring for those around you, that's not selfish. Some of the people who don't practice self-care are actually, whether they know it or not, being very selfish. And here's what I mean by that, because I don't want to offend you if you have trouble with self-care. If you have people that you care for in your life, and you have responsibilities at work or at home, and you go down, your stress takes you out, who has to pick up? Who has to carry the water that you were carrying? Your kids, your spouse, your coworkers? A lot of times we don't want to take time for us because we want to make sure that everybody else is taken care of. And while that is important, while that's noble, if we sacrifice our own health and we go down, everybody else has to pick up the slack. And actually, that's pretty selfish. So do yourself a favor and practice some self-care. If you are taking care of yourself because you know that a healthier you means a healthier family or a healthier work environment, and you are making sure that you are secure in your own emotional health, if you are making sure that you are taking care of yourself so that other people don't have to suffer your own stuff because you're not healthy, you're probably not being selfish. You're just being good at self-care. And if people don't get that, and people think you're being selfish because you have boundaries or you have priorities that are based on you, have them listen to this podcast. Or better yet, have them send me an email. I would be delighted to talk through and advocate for your own personal health and self-care. But the bottom line is, if you know you're taking care of you because you have responsibilities to take care of others, you're probably not being selfish. You're probably just practicing really good self-care. And so on that, maybe you need to go for a walk today, or you need to spend some time in the trees and in the woods, and you just need to be still in nature and take care of yourself. Studies have shown that spending time in the woods and in nature can decrease anxiety by 25% and the symptoms of anxiety by 25%. That's pretty good. Just go for a walk. Maybe you just need to sit in quiet. Maybe you need to call a friend that you haven't talked to in a long time and prioritize some girlfriend time or some guy time over beverages or over a coffee, maybe decaf, because that will intensify your stress if you have too much of it. But take some time for healthy relationships. There are some elements that you can do that if you haven't done in a long time would be good for you to prioritize. And if you need some skills, I've got a couple listed here that I just want to walk through for you. The first, wherever you are, if you're in a stressful season or a stressful situation, take 2 minutes and plant your feet firmly on the ground. I like to have clients sit forward so the weight of their body is kind of shifted onto the front and back of their feet, kind of evenly on the soles of their feet, and they stay grounded and you just be still. You can do this standing too. One of the byproducts of stress is we tend to move a lot more. And so it's hard for us to be still when we're stressed out, but forcing yourself to be still and planting your feet firmly on the ground is a proven way to decrease stress, decrease your heart rate, and calm your body. I recommend to clients that they take 2 to 3 opportunities in the day to just be still and in quiet. And if you couple this with deep breathing, that's even more beneficial. When we're stressed out, I'm going to get a little technical here with some neuroscience. When we're stressed out, our blood flow to our brain moves from the front of our brain, which is the prefrontal lobes or the prefrontal cortex, to the back of our brain, which is the amygdala, or what is commonly known as the reactive part of our brain. When we're in that reaction mode, we are going to feel stressed out. We're going to be pumping out adrenaline and cortisol. It triggers what is called the fight or flight response, or the sympathetic nervous system response. It's the part that amps us up. If we're stressed out, that is supercharged. When we take a deep breath, we tell the parasympathetic nervous response or the relaxation response to kick in, and our blood flow shifts from the back of our brain back to the front of our brain, and we can use critical thinking. We can relax. We are more calm and we have things more put together. And studies have shown that a deep breath in through your nose for 4.5 seconds and out through your mouth for 4.5 seconds, just like this. Just like that. You do that for 2 minutes, maybe 5, if you've got the patience for it. That can decrease your symptoms of stress by anywhere from 10 to 25%. And that's a pretty big deal. If you do that, coupled with being still, you're only increasing your chances of calming down that much faster. Another trick that you can use that I find to be really helpful, especially with kids, is put your hands in some water, whether it's a bowl of water or let them run under the water in the sink. If you can submerge your whole body, that's even better, taking a bath. I live in the West Michigan area. Being in water, even since I was a little kid, has always been really relaxing for me. And so going into Lake Michigan and submerging my body or taking a bath or sitting in a hot tub, all of these help us to decrease our stress. If you can't take a bath or get into Lake Michigan or you can't get into a hot tub, just put your hands in a sink full of water and just let them sit there for a couple of minutes. That actually decreases stress. A game I like to play with clients, and I like to teach my clients, it's called the 5-4-3-2-1 game. And essentially, you're going to engage all of the dominant senses, and you're going to use a practice called mindfulness to help calm yourself down. You look for 5 objects in your office or in your room or in the place where you're working, and you look for 5 objects that you can see. And then you listen for 4 unique sounds. If you're outside, 4 unique animal sounds, or the wind rushing, or you can hear the trees creaking, or you can hear fallen limbs in nature, or touch 3 items on your desk, or if you work in a shop, 3 tools that you have by you. So you look and you listen and you touch 5, 4, 3, and then you say 2 words that bring you joy or amusement. For me, I say Christy and Pike. That's my wife and my son. No matter what I'm doing, when I say their names, it brings warmth to my heart and a smile to my face. 5, 4, 3, 2, and then 1, you taste 1 food or a beverage that's satisfying to you. I keep Werther's Originals and Wintergreen Mints in my bag at all times, so that if I need it, I can do the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 game with myself. And that helps me to calm down. And it could help you too. You may want to focus on a poem or a quote or a meaningful piece of writing. You might want to focus on the whole poem and then focus on a portion and then focus on a few of the words and maybe even work your way down to a single word. In the biblical sense, in the history of the church, there was a practice called a lectio divina, which is where you would focus on a large passage of scripture. You would read the whole thing. Then you would find a section of it. You would read that section. Then you would find a short verse. You would read that verse. Then you would find a series of words in that short verse, and you would read those, and then you would focus on 1 word, and you just work your way down. And this has been for centuries an ancient practice of connecting with God through his Bible, but also a really helpful way of centering ourselves and calming ourselves down. And finally, if you're looking for something to do that's helpful for you when you're under bad stress, do something for your mind and your body and your soul every day. Read something, listen to a podcast, go for a walk, get some exercise. Maybe go to prayer if you are a person of faith, but do something for your mind and your body and your soul. And if you can't kick it, and it's really hard, Talk to somebody. Say something to someone. When we talk about how we're feeling, overwhelmed, stressed out, not feeling great, it actually liberates us. It makes us feel better. If you talk to a trusted professional like a counselor or a chaplain or a pastor, it can bring relief. And be really, really careful of your vices and your devices. Drinking, a little bit. Nothing wrong with that in moderation. But drinking to give control over to the substance, or drinking to escape, or drinking to numb out, that's only going to make things worse. Your stress cannot be ignored. It can be avoided temporarily, but it cannot be ignored. Smoking, just recognize nicotine actually increases stress chemicals. Shopping, binge watching, all of these might be helpful in small amounts, but in large amounts, they are really, really dangerous. And they can add to increased stress and greater problems in your relationships. And be really careful of interacting with digital devices when you're stressed out. Here's the reality. Our technology triggers more stress in our brains than we think. Looking at a device, scrolling through social media, whether it's Facebook or Instagram or TikTok, actually increases neurological activity and increases your stress. It doesn't decrease it. So you may escape thinking it's going to make you calm down, but it's actually going to make your brain more agitated. And stay away from the news. The news is not helpful. In his book, The Gift of Fear, Gavin de Becker has a whole section related to the reality that news media actually capitalizes and profits off of our fear and stress. They create stress to hook us in so that we keep coming back, and they profit off of it. If you are going through a stressful season, put your phone, your social media, and the news away. It is one of the single most effective things you can do to help mitigate the stress that you're under. And as I mentioned before, if you are really stuck in a bad and stressful time in your life, ask for help. Ask for help. Because if you're not careful, it can move you from bad to toxic. And that's where we really want to watch out. That's where we really want to be careful, because toxic stress can be really damaging to us and the people around us. And so that's bad stress. That's where we are. I hope that you've picked up a couple of thoughts on some stress that you have and some coping skills that maybe you utilize. Maybe you need to add some new ones to our list. Again, we're going to have a lot of this information in the podcast notes. And if you've got any questions about bad stress, or you want some more help on navigating your bad stress, send us an email at chaplaincy@fearlessfollower.org. We would love to help you with that stress. We would love to help you work through it and answer questions that you have and point you to resources for managing your stress. Join us next time as we talk about toxic stress and trauma. And just a note on that, how every single person who was alive during the pandemic has gone through toxic stress and trauma. And we're going to talk about some helpful things that you can do to reverse the effects of trauma and to deal with the effects of trauma, but also understand how to insulate yourself from future occurrences of toxic stress in your life. Again, my name's Josh, and I am so thankful that you tuned in for the Chaplaincy on the Go podcast, and we will talk with you next time.